Finally, 22nd of August 2023, Arrow released Unman, Wittering and Zigo on Bluray. This film has never been released on home video before. VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, Super 8. It's never been released on anything before. And finally comes out of limbo on a rather stunning Arrow video release. Here's your slipcover. David Hemmings looking rather pensive there. This film from 1971 is one that I'm not going to go into spoilers on at all, because there's a very high probability that should you have not been lucky enough to see it on the BBC when it was repeated semi-regularly up until maybe the late 90s, early 2000s, then you won't know it. Regardless, it was quite a television staple back in the day, and it's vanished in the last few decades for sure, and I don't know if it ever achieved any fame in America or overseas. Regardless though, it is a stunning film based on Giles Cooper's wonderful 1958 radio play, which is included on this rather wonderfully, all cleaned up, spruced up with no clicks and hisses. The plot, or the outline, because I'm not going to go any further than the first act, concerns David Hemmings being drafted in as a new teacher. He's just switched trades, and he is the new master at a boys' school, private school, who has been drafted in to replace the previous incumbent, who took a little tumble over a cliff. Had a terrible accident, and he meets the class and tries to do the come on boys, I'm on your side, don't need to play dirty, I can be your friend, and if you don't go along with that, then I'll dish out punishments, etc. So they start pushing him a little bit to see what they can get away with, and he gives them detention on a Saturday, and the boys just refuse, and not in a typical, and again this is all first act stuff, not in a typical Breakfast Club way. They tell the David Hemmings character, no, we're not going to do that, we're just not going to. What do you mean you're not going to? Well, we could, but then the same thing will happen to you that happened to the last guy. We'll throw you off the cliff. And they ain't kidding. Those boys ain't kidding. Every single one of them sticks to that story that they murdered that teacher. Every single one of them has an alibi, so David Hemmings can't go for them. There's no one standout ringleader, so he can't just target him or take him out. They are an amorphous blob of rebellion, defiant and standing up to David Hemmings over a dozen bawdy young teen boys, and I think that's about where I'll draw the line. I mean, you can kind of imagine, I suppose, where some of it goes from there, but imagine how dark it could go, and that's as dark as it goes. Really, it doesn't take the light way round just because it's based on the 1950s radio play. No, that 50s radio play pushed a lot of boundaries. So this film goes to some very dark places involving, trigger warning, rape, and yes, child murder, and bullying, and all sorts. It's one of those films that, again, because it's American, it's not been given a UK rating, but it'd probably be a 12, because there's nothing explicit in it, or maybe the 15 because of the. But what you think you're seeing and what the implication of what could happen is a lot greater than what's actually depicted on screen. It lets you do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of, if you don't get out here, then this will happen, and that's a lot more powerful than actually showing you that happening, I think. So we'll go into a couple of the behind the scenes things. First of all, produced by David Hemmings as well, who at the time was obviously a major star after Blow Up, and God, he even had a small role in Barbarella, didn't he? But directed by, second film by John Mackenzie, great Scottish director, who would go on to direct The Long Good Friday and Apaches, the wonderful short film. The Fourth Protocol. His career kind of stuttered after The Long Good Friday. It's a great shame. He showed such talent in that film, and yet it didn't translate to any kind of success long term. And it's not his fault. He just wasn't given the opportunities. And it's shot by Jeff Unsworth, who was the DP on 2001: A Space Odyssey. And if that doesn't show you the journeyman life of a DP, a cinematographer, then I don't know what does. After lensing one of the most famous, glorious looking films of all time in 2001, here he is just shooting a rather naff 1950s / 1970s, when it's actually set, boys' school in a classroom with dirty desks and mucky children. So that's the rather wondrous life of a DP. However, the performances themselves, David Hemmings manages to sell you on exactly the right level of fear, but also determination that he can somehow stop these kids, or did they even do it, or if they did, I'll bring them to justice. He completely sells you on that. His wife, played by Carolyn Seymour, sells you on the notion of not quite believing them, maybe thinking they're just boys, they're just being boys, and then when something happens to her, 100% she sells you on that. She's got a wonderful scene, which could easily be a very sexist, misogynist scene, and it's totally not. It's quite ahead of its game in that regards. And the boys, again, you're almost not supposed to think of them as individuals, despite the title being three of their names, Unman, Wittering and Zigo. You're almost supposed to think of them as one unit, because they are or men, as they're referred to in the film, because they think like men, they talk like men, they even smell like men. Why shouldn't they be men? The jail's keeper, you're probably thinking Unman, Wittering and Zigo if you haven't seen it. It's such a bizarre name. Again, that's the name of three of the boys. Let me read you the register very quickly. Giles Cooper came up with these names. Where he got some of them, I don't know. I absolutely adore them. Agarage, Ankerton, Borby, Bungabine, Cloistermouth. I think Cloistermouth's my favourite. Cuthbun, Hog, Lipstraub, Muffet, Mum Major, Oris, Root, Terhue, Trimble, Unman, Wittering, and Zigo, who is absent. Zigo never appears in the film. Rather wonderfully, he's billed in the film as Zigo absent. He's absent throughout the whole film. He's got a mysterious illness and is on some kind of recuperation trip to Jamaica with his father. What a wonderful, odd little touch to add in there, that one of the title characters never appears. It's very Waiting for Godot, isn't it? But the whole is definitely more than the sum of its parts. So the whole film itself gives you this awful atmosphere of terror, of testosterone from these young boys, and just the almost like an animal attack film, that you're constantly on edge about when they're about to strike next. They are essentially like Jaws, or like giant snakes, giant whatever, insert your giant attacking animal here, and that's essentially the way the boys act in this. They act as one decisive unit, hell-bent for destruction. And David Hemmings has to combat them the same way that Roy Scheider would a shark. It's very, very similar in that regard, and it becomes a battle of wits, but it also, more importantly, becomes a battle of nerves. Who can blink first? Who's going to blink first? And again, I'm not going to go into anything beyond the first act. I mean, even me telling you that they bumped off their last teacher and they're now threatening to do the same to David Hemmings, that happens in the first 20 minutes. First 20 minutes of this film. So, a couple of the extras are very notable. There's a great commentary with Kim Newman and Sean Hogan. I'm not terribly sure Sean Hogan was necessary because Kim does all the talking. Kim, pipe down a little bit, let Sean talk. No, it's great. Matthew Sweets does a 25-minute appreciation, which is good because it kind of bottles a lot of the commentary in the booklet into a more concise info dump, and Matthew Sweet's just so knowledgeable about the British film industry in general. Then you get a new feature with some of the cast looking back at the production, including Carol Ann Seymour, who still looks remarkable for her age. She's 400 years old this year. You get, as I said, the original 1950s radio play, trailer, booklet, poster, etc., etc. The transfer is wonderful. It looks great. It sounds great. It's not that kind of film where you're ever going to be thinking, you know, it looks world class or anything. But again, it's shot by the guy who did 2001, so it looks great. I'm just trying to think. Here's how most British teachers get through the day, and they actually sit drinking during lunch. Get sloshed at lunchtime, just like we always knew they did. There's the lovely Carol Ann Seymour. Some people probably know her best as Abby Grant in Survivors. There's a couple of the charming kids. And wonderfully, they did cast above age actors, but they look still like teenagers. So it doesn't have that very slasher movie thing of thinking, you're clearly a 33-year-old man pretending to be 18, this is ridiculous. It doesn't go that silly. And then it's got faces in it you'll recognise from the British film industry. David Jackson pops up, from Blake 7 and whatnot. The headmaster himself was played by Douglas Wilmer, who is probably best known as Sherlock Holmes in the 1960s BBC TV show, only to be replaced after he said, "I'm not enjoying this," by Peter Cushing. Not a bad understudy. I can't recommend this highly enough. And the booklet is wonderful too, by the way, with a wonderful essay on Giles Cooper. And then a kind of making of essay, which is a bit redundant with the documentary and the Matthew Sweet piece and the commentary. They all three do a bit of the same territory, to be honest. But hey, the Giles Cooper piece is particularly wonderful. The screenwriter, let's see, what was his name? Simon Raven, wasn't it? Yeah, Simon Raven. Oh, you should have a read about him. Simon Raven was like a libertine or something. He was living like it was the 18th century and he could do what he wanted. He got this woman pregnant and she wrote to him and asked for child support, and he said, "Have spent all my money, suggest you eat the baby." Charming fellow, eh? Well, I can't recommend this highly enough, so I'll leave it there. Hopefully you have either the inclination to now see this, or you might have seen it before. If so, let me know. I'll be back when I'm back. I've been so busy recently, but I wasn't going to miss the final release of Unman, Wittering and Zigo, who is absent for this, so I'm definitely 100% I was making this video come rain or shine. So I'll be back soon. Till then,